My friends, let us consider the intricate machinery of the human heart and the perplexing world in which we dwell. Life, in all its beauty and chaos, often feels like a riddle without an answer. We yearn for meaning, for purpose, for a light to guide us through the shadows. Yet how often do we attempt to construct this meaning by our own hands, as if we were the architects of eternity? The truth, if we dare to face it, is this: we are not masters of our fate. And yet this is not a truth to dread, but one to embrace with joy, for it is in the relinquishing of our own feeble control that we find a freedom far greater than anything we could imagine. Trusting God is not a passive resignation, as some might suppose. It is not the act of closing one's eyes to the world's troubles or surrendering to blind fate. No, it is a conscious and active leap into the arms of the one who knows the beginning from the end. It is the courage to admit that we are not sufficient on our own, but that we were never meant to be. Picture for a moment the trust of a child holding the hand of their father, crossing a busy street. The child does not analyze the traffic, nor does he question whether his father will lead him to safety. He simply trusts. And in that trust there is peace. So it is with us when we place our trust in God. The storms of life may rage, but we are not tossed about by every wave, for our anchor holds firm. To trust God is to align ourselves with a wisdom far beyond our understanding, a plan far greater than we could conceive. And yet we resist. Why? Because trust demands humility. It demands the surrender of our pride, our illusions of self-sufficiency. We clutch tightly to our plans, our fears, our doubts, as though letting go would leave us empty. But paradoxically, it is in letting go that we are filled. When you trust God, transformation begins not in some external, dramatic fashion, but in the quiet depths of your soul. Anxiety gives way to peace, despair to hope, and confusion to clarity. This does not mean life becomes easy or that pain disappears. Rather, it means that even in the darkest valley, you are not alone. Even in uncertainty, there is purpose. Trusting God is not merely a momentary decision, but a daily practice, an ongoing relationship. It requires time, patience, and vulnerability. But the reward is immeasurable. You discover that you are not wandering aimlessly through life, but are part of a grander narrative, a story written by the author of all things. So I urge you, my friends, to consider this truth: what you cannot control, He can; what you cannot comprehend, He understands; and what you cannot overcome, He has already conquered. Trust in Him, and you will find that life is no longer a burden to endure, but a gift to embrace. The transformation begins when you dare to trust, not because you have all the answers, but because you know the one who does. And in that trust you will find a life that is richer, deeper, and more meaningful than you ever imagined. When we trust God, we no longer feel the weight of having to control everything ourselves. Anxiety often stems from uncertainty about the future or the inability to manage circumstances. Trusting God means believing that He is sovereign and that His plans are good. This assurance calms our hearts and allows us to rest, knowing that He is in control. Think of someone lost in a storm. If they trust their guide to lead them out, the fear of the unknown lessens. Similarly, trusting God alleviates our fears because we believe He will guide us safely through life's challenges. Peace doesn't mean living without difficulties. It means having an unshakable calm amid the storms of life because of God's presence. Trusting God allows us to face challenges with confidence, knowing that He walks with us. His peace surpasses human understanding and is not dependent on external circumstances. Jesus calmed a storm while His disciples panicked. Trusting God doesn't always mean the storm will disappear immediately, but His presence gives us peace while we endure it. Throughout the Bible, God makes promises of love, provision, and salvation. Trusting these promises gives us security because God's character is unwavering. Unlike human promises that may fail, God's word is eternal and dependable. A parent's promise to care for their child gives the child security. On a greater scale, trusting God's promises ensures we can live without fear, knowing that He will always fulfill His word. Life is filled with unknowns, from health concerns to financial challenges. Trusting God equips us to face these uncertainties with calmness rather than panic. When we trust, we let go of the need to control everything and accept that God knows the path ahead. Abraham trusted God when asked to leave his homeland without knowing where he was going. His calm response came from faith in God's provision. Similarly, trusting God allows us to navigate the unknown with peace. Doubt often clouds our decisions and stirs unrest in our hearts. Trusting God silences these doubts because it anchors us in His truth. Rather than focusing on what-ifs and worst-case scenarios, trust directs our thoughts to God's power and reliability. A boat anchored in a harbor remains steady, no matter how rough the sea becomes. Trusting God is like anchoring ourselves to Him, silencing the doubts that threaten to overwhelm us. Our perspective is limited to what we see in the moment, but God sees the entire timeline of our lives. Trusting Him means believing that He is orchestrating everything for our good, even when we don't understand. His foresight ensures that His plan is always better than ours. A painter working on a canvas might seem chaotic up close, but stepping back reveals a masterpiece. Trusting God is like trusting the painter to create something beautiful, even when we can't see the full picture. Trials often feel overwhelming when we are in the middle of them. Trusting God helps us see that challenges can have a purpose, such as strengthening our character or teaching us valuable lessons. This perspective makes trials easier to endure. Joseph, sold into slavery, trusted God and later saw how his trials positioned him to save his family and a nation. Trusting God transforms trials into stepping stones for greater purpose. What we perceive as failures or setbacks often have a hidden purpose in God's plan. Trusting Him allows us to see how He uses these moments to shape us and prepare us for something greater. A seed buried in the ground may seem forgotten, but it is actually growing roots to become a thriving plant. Similarly, our setbacks often lead to growth when we trust God's timing and process. Pain can feel meaningless without trust in God. Trusting Him enables us to see that He works through even our most difficult experiences for a greater purpose. God doesn't waste our pain. Instead, He uses it to refine us and often to help others. Someone who has faced deep loss may later find purpose by comforting others going through similar struggles. Trusting God helps us see how pain can lead to something meaningful. God's plans and thoughts are beyond human comprehension. Trusting Him means accepting that we won't always understand His actions, but can rest in the assurance of His goodness. Even when life feels confusing or unfair, we can trust that His ways are ultimately for our benefit. A child doesn't always understand a parent's decisions, like limiting screen time or requiring bedtime. Yet the parent's actions are for the child's well-being. Similarly, trusting God means believing in His goodness, even when His ways are beyond our understanding. True change starts when we stop relying solely on our strength and surrender to God. By giving Him control, we allow Him to work in us and through us. Transformation doesn't happen through our striving, but through trusting His power and guidance. Imagine holding onto a heavy burden that someone else offers to carry for you. Only when you release it can they lift it. Similarly, when we surrender to God, we create space for Him to bring transformation. When we trust God, He aligns our hearts with His purposes. Our desires shift from selfish ambitions to seeking what pleases Him. Trusting God changes our priorities and helps us focus on things that truly matter. A gardener prunes a plant so it can grow stronger and bear more fruit. Trusting God allows Him to prune our lives, shaping our hearts to desire what is good and fruitful. Trusting God frees us from a self-centered mindset. When we rely on Him, we realize we don't need to focus on ourselves to ensure our needs are met. This shift allows us to serve others and live selflessly, knowing God will provide for us. Jesus trusted the Father fully, allowing Him to give His life for others. Trusting God enables us to live generously and selflessly, following His example. Trusting God reminds us that every good thing comes from Him. This awareness fosters gratitude for His blessings and humility in recognizing our dependence on Him. Instead of pride, we live in awe of His grace and provision. A person who receives an unexpected gift feels grateful and humbled. Trusting God turns life itself into such a gift, inspiring us to thank Him daily. The more we trust God, the more we reflect His character. Trust develops qualities like patience, kindness, and faithfulness in us. Over time, His Spirit works in us to make us resemble Him in our thoughts, actions, and attitudes. A child who spends time with a loving parent often adopts their qualities. Similarly, trusting God transforms us to reflect His goodness and love. When we trust God, we draw strength from Him during hardships. Trials that might otherwise break us become opportunities for God to demonstrate His sustaining power. Trusting Him ensures we can endure and even grow through difficulties. A tree deeply rooted withstands storms. Trusting God roots us in His strength, enabling us to stand firm in life's challenges. Life often feels like walking through a fog where we can't see the next step. Trusting God gives us the courage to move forward, even when the way ahead isn't clear. He becomes our guide, ensuring we don't lose our way. A person crossing a river on stepping stones can't see the whole path but trusts the guide who leads them. Similarly, trusting God gives us the boldness to take the next step, even in uncertainty. Trusting God helps us see that hardships are not meant to harm us, but to refine and strengthen our faith. He uses challenges to mold our character and prepare us for greater purposes. Gold is refined in fire to remove impurities. Likewise, God uses trials to purify and shape us into something stronger and more beautiful. Trusting Him through this process ensures we don't lose hope. Storms in life are inevitable, but trusting God gives us resilience. Instead of being overwhelmed, we stand firm because we believe He is in control. Trust anchors us, keeping us steady no matter how fierce the storm. A ship with a strong anchor remains secure, even in turbulent waters. Trusting God acts as our anchor, grounding us in His stability during life's storms. There are times when everything around us seems to fail: our plans, our resources, even the people we rely on. In such moments, God's promises give us hope and strength. Trusting His word ensures we remain steadfast, knowing He never fails. A hiker lost in the wilderness clings to a map that promises a way out. Similarly, trusting God's promises provides direction and hope when we feel lost. Life's struggles often feel meaningless, but trusting God allows us to see their deeper purpose. God uses challenges to teach us, strengthen us, and prepare us for what's ahead. When we trust Him, struggles no longer seem random, they become opportunities for growth and transformation. A student might struggle with a tough exam, but later realizes the knowledge gained was essential for their future. Similarly, trusting God helps us see that struggles are part of His greater plan. When we trust God, we allow Him to guide our lives according to His perfect plan. This alignment ensures we're walking in His will rather than chasing our own limited understanding. Trusting Him leads us to live a purposeful and meaningful life. A puzzle piece only makes sense when placed in the right spot. Trusting God is like letting Him position us in the grand picture of His divine plan. True purpose is discovered not through our ambitions, but by trusting and following God's will. He created us with unique gifts and a calling, and trusting Him opens doors to fulfill that purpose. A tool functions best when used for its intended purpose. Similarly, when we trust God, He guides us toward our life's purpose, ensuring we live in alignment with His design. Everyday tasks and routines can feel insignificant, but trusting God gives them purpose. When we do everything for His glory and trust His plan, even small actions carry eternal significance. A teacher grading papers might see it as tedious, but trusting God reveals that their work shapes future generations. Similarly, trusting Him brings meaning to all we do. Trusting God means believing that His plan is for our ultimate good, even when we can't see or understand it. While circumstances may seem unfavorable, God's intentions are always rooted in love and his desire for our best. A child receiving a vaccination may not understand the pain at the moment, but the parent knows it's for their well-being. Trusting God helps us endure challenges, knowing his plans are for our benefit. Life's darkest moments can extinguish hope if we rely solely on ourselves. Trusting God keeps hope alive because we believe he is working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. A farmer plants seeds and trusts the unseen process of growth, hoping for a harvest. Similarly, trusting God sustains our hope during seasons of waiting or hardship. Reflecting on how God has been faithful before strengthens our trust for the future. Remembering his provision, protection, and guidance in previous seasons helps us remain confident that he will do it again. A traveler trusts a map that has reliably guided them before. Likewise, recalling God's past faithfulness reminds us he will not fail us in the future. Trusting God fills us with hope for what is to come. Life's challenges are temporary, but God's promises point us to a future filled with his goodness and blessings. Faith assures us that today's struggles will not last forever. After a storm, the sun always shines again. Trusting God gives us the perspective to endure hardships, knowing better days are ahead. Life often leaves us with questions that seem impossible to answer. Why did this happen? Or what should I do next? Trusting God helps us release the need for immediate answers and rest in his wisdom, knowing he holds the answers even if we don't. A child might not understand why they must go to bed early but trusts their parents' decision. Similarly, trusting God replaces despair with peace, even when life doesn't make sense. Hope doesn't come from perfect circumstances, it comes from trusting in who God is. When we trust his goodness, love, and faithfulness, hope naturally follows. His unchanging character gives us a solid foundation, even in turbulent times. A lighthouse provides hope to sailors in a storm because of its steady light. Trusting God's unchanging nature is like fixing our eyes on that lighthouse, letting hope guide us safely through life's storms. When we trust God, our inner strength grows. Challenges no longer overwhelm us because we believe he is working on our behalf. This resilience helps us endure hardships without losing faith or hope. A tree with deep roots can weather the fiercest winds. Trusting God plants those deep roots in our spirit, enabling us to withstand trials with confidence and stability. Trusting God allows us to access his infinite wisdom. Instead of relying on our limited understanding, we seek his guidance, knowing that his perspective is far greater than ours. A traveler trusts a GPS for directions through unfamiliar terrain. Similarly, trusting God ensures we are guided along the right path, even when we don't know the way. When we trust God to handle justice and fairness, we are freed from the burden of holding grudges or seeking revenge. Trusting him gives us the strength to forgive others, knowing he will handle all things in his perfect timing. Joseph forgave his brothers for betraying him, trusting that God's plan was greater than their wrongdoing. Similarly, trusting God helps us release bitterness and embrace peace. Trusting God removes the worry about the past and fear of the future, allowing us to live fully in the present. When we believe he is in control, we can focus on today's blessings and opportunities without being weighed down by distractions. A musician playing in an orchestra trusts the conductor's guidance, focusing on each note in the moment. Similarly, trusting God helps us live fully in the present, knowing he orchestrates the bigger picture. When we place our trust in God, his love feels more real and personal. Trusting him opens our hearts to recognize his care, provision, and presence in every area of life. A child feels their parents' love more deeply when they trust their intentions. Similarly, trusting God allows us to experience his love in new and transformative ways. When we trust God, we no longer feel the pressure to please everyone. His approval becomes enough, and we can live authentically, knowing our identity and worth are secure in him. A student who trusts their teacher's guidance focuses on their own progress rather than comparing themselves to others. Similarly, trusting God frees us from living for others' validation. Worry often stems from trying to control things outside our power. Trusting God gives us peace as we surrender control and rest in his ability to handle all things. This peace transcends circumstances and protects our hearts and minds. A passenger on a plane relaxes when they trust the pilot. Similarly, trusting God allows us to rest peacefully, knowing he is in control of our journey. Trusting God shifts our perspective from dwelling on problems to seeking his solutions. Instead of feeling stuck or defeated, faith opens our eyes to the possibilities God can create, even in difficult situations. The Israelites faced the Red Sea with no escape, but Moses trusted God to make a way. Trusting God redirects our focus from obstacles to the opportunities His power can provide. When we trust God, we learn to be content regardless of our circumstances. We stop striving for more or worrying about what we lack because we trust Him to provide exactly what we need. Paul wrote about being content in every situation because his trust was in God, not in material possessions. Similarly, trusting God helps us find satisfaction and joy in every season of life. When we trust God, He often works through us to impact others. Our faith becomes an example, encouraging those around us. Trusting Him also makes us more generous and compassionate as we freely share His blessings with others. A mentor who trusts God inspires their mentees to do the same, creating a ripple effect. Trusting God allows us to be channels of His blessings and love to those around us. When we trust God, we remain open to the surprises He has in store. Often, His blessings come in forms we don't anticipate, but our trust helps us embrace them with gratitude. Abraham trusted God when asked to sacrifice Isaac, and his faith led to a miraculous blessing. Trusting God allows us to receive blessings that go beyond our expectations. Trusting God transforms the way we relate to others by teaching us to love, forgive, and serve selflessly. When we rely on God's love, we have more to give and can build healthier, more meaningful connections. A couple that trusts God for guidance finds strength to overcome challenges in their relationship. Trusting God fosters trust and harmony in all relationships. Faith reshapes how we think, replacing fear, negativity, and doubt with hope and optimism. Trusting God aligns our perspective with His, enabling us to see life through the lens of His promises. A person facing failure can either despair or trust that God has a better plan. Trust renews their mindset, allowing them to approach setbacks with courage and perseverance. When we trust God, we step out of our comfort zones and embrace the abilities and gifts He's given us. Trusting Him gives us the courage to pursue His calling and fulfill the potential He has placed within us. Moses doubted his ability to lead, but trusting God allowed him to become one of history's greatest leaders. Trusting God empowers us to reach heights we never thought possible. Fear of failure often paralyzes us, but trusting God gives us confidence to move forward. When we believe that He works all things for our good, even failures become lessons and stepping stones to growth. Peter trusted Jesus enough to step out of the boat onto the water. Trusting God doesn't eliminate risks, but it frees us to take them with faith, knowing He is with us. Faith in God fuels boldness to chase dreams we might otherwise be too afraid to pursue. Trust reminds us that He is with us every step of the way, turning impossibilities into realities. David faced Goliath with boldness, not because of his own strength, but because of his trust in God. Similarly, trusting God emboldens us to face challenges and follow our dreams. When we trust God, even obstacles become opportunities for growth, learning, and witnessing His power. Challenges that seem insurmountable are transformed into moments where God's strength is revealed. The walls of Jericho seemed like an obstacle, but through faith and obedience, they became a testament to God's power. Trusting God helps us see possibilities where others see problems. Life often feels like a race to achieve, prove, or earn approval. Trusting God allows us to rest in His grace, knowing we don't have to strive endlessly. His love and acceptance are unconditional, giving us peace and rest. A child resting in their parents' arms trusts they are cared for without needing to earn it. Trusting God gives us that same rest for our souls. Fear can hold us captive, but trusting God liberates us. Faith reminds us that He is greater than anything we fear, giving us courage to step out of fear's grip and live freely. Esther trusted God to give her courage to approach the king, risking her life to save her people. Trusting God frees us to face fears and overcome them. When we live a life of trust in God, we leave a legacy for others, our children, friends, and community to follow. Our faith inspires them to trust God and see His work in their lives. Generations were inspired by Abraham's faith and trust in God's promises. Trusting God creates a ripple effect, influencing and blessing those who come after us. Faith and trust in God often precede miraculous interventions. When we trust Him, we step into the realm where the impossible becomes possible, allowing God to show His power in our lives. When the widow in the Bible trusted Elijah's instruction to use her last bit of oil, it multiplied miraculously to sustain her and her son. Trusting God invites His miraculous provision. Life is full of uncertainty, but trusting God gives us a steady confidence. We don't need all the answers because we believe He is in control and working things out for our good. Daniel trusted God in the lion's den, remaining calm and confident despite the danger. Similarly, trusting God gives us peace amid uncertainty. Trusting God helps us reflect on life and recognize how He has been guiding us all along. Even in moments when we didn't understand, His fingerprints were there, shaping and protecting us. Joseph realized in hindsight that God had used his suffering to save many lives. Trusting God allows us to see His faithfulness when we look back on our journey. Faith isn't just about receiving blessings, it's about building a deeper, more intimate connection with God. Trusting Him strengthens our bond, transforming our relationship from distant formality to personal closeness. David's trust in God made him a man after God's own heart, demonstrating how trust nurtures a rich and personal relationship with the Lord. When we trust God, we stop living in fear of lack. Trusting Him as our provider transforms our mindset from scarcity to abundance, allowing us to live generously and without fear. The Israelites in the wilderness trusted God for daily manna, teaching them to rely on His provision. Trusting God frees us from hoarding and fear, enabling us to give freely. Our trust in God is contagious. When others witness how faith sustains us through trials and transforms our lives, they are encouraged to trust Him too. Paul and Silas trusted God by singing hymns in prison, which inspired the jailer and led to his conversion. Trusting God allows us to influence others positively through our example. Trusting God turns His promises from abstract ideas into personal realities. Faith bridges the gap between His word and our experience, allowing us to walk confidently in His assurances. Abraham trusted God's promise of a son, and though it seemed impossible, he held on to faith until Isaac was born. Trusting God makes His promises a lived reality. We often feel unworthy or incapable, but trusting God reminds us that His power is made perfect in our weakness. Trusting Him gives us the confidence to rise above our limitations and fulfill His calling. Gideon saw himself as the least in his family, but God's assurance enabled him to lead Israel to victory. Trusting God equips us to achieve far more than we think possible. When we trust God, we hold on even when our prayers seem unanswered. Faith assures us that His timing and ways are perfect, teaching us patience and perseverance. Hannah prayed for years for a child, trusting God despite the delay. Her faith was rewarded with Samuel. Trusting God sustains us through seasons of waiting. Life can feel chaotic and disorienting, but trusting God brings clarity. His Spirit guides us, helping us discern the right path amid the noise and uncertainty of life. When the disciples trusted Jesus during the storm, He calmed the waves and brought peace. Trusting God cuts through life's confusion, showing us the way forward. Joy rooted in God's promises cannot be shaken by circumstances. Trusting Him allows us to experience this deep, abiding joy, even in the face of trials and uncertainty. Paul, writing from prison, encouraged others to rejoice, because his trust in God gave him a joy that wasn't dependent on his surroundings. Trusting God creates a joy that transcends circumstances. Doubt is natural, but trusting God helps us push past disbelief and grow in faith. Trusting Him allows us to embrace His truths even when our human understanding falls short. Thomas doubted Jesus' resurrection, but his trust was restored when he encountered Christ. Trusting God strengthens our faith and dispels doubt. Life is filled with tough decisions, but trusting God gives us access to His wisdom. He guides us through prayer, Scripture, and His Spirit, ensuring that we choose paths aligned with His will. Solomon trusted God to give him wisdom, and as a result he became one of the wisest leaders. Trusting God provides clarity and confidence in decision-making. When we trust God, we begin to see His blessings everywhere, even in difficult times. This trust fosters gratitude, helping us focus on what we have rather than what we lack. Job, despite his suffering, trusted God's sovereignty and continued to praise Him. Trusting God cultivates a grateful heart, regardless of circumstances. Overthinking often leads to anxiety and indecision, but trusting God liberates us from this cycle. Faith allows us to rest, knowing He is in control and will guide us at the right time. Mary trusted Jesus at the wedding in Cana, not overthinking the situation when the wine ran out. Trusting God brings peace to a restless mind. Our trust gives God the opportunity to work mightily in and through us. When we rely on Him, His power is displayed, glorifying Him and strengthening our faith. Elijah trusted God on Mount Carmel, and God revealed his power by consuming the offering with fire. Trusting God allows him to demonstrate his greatness in our lives. Trusting God enables us to face our fears with courage. His promises remind us that he is with us, empowering us to confront challenges that would otherwise intimidate us. David's trust in God gave him the courage to face Goliath. Trust turns fear into boldness and equips us for victory. Faith reorders our priorities, helping us focus on eternal values rather than temporary pursuits. Trusting God aligns our lives with his purposes, making us more intentional in how we spend our time and energy. The disciples left everything to follow Jesus, trusting that his mission mattered more than their livelihoods. Trusting God helps us focus on what's truly meaningful. When life gets tough, trust keeps us going. Faith reminds us that God is with us and will use every hardship for his greater purpose, giving us the strength to endure. Noah trusted God's command to build the ark despite the ridicule and years of waiting. Trusting God sustains us through long and difficult seasons. Trusting God allows us to experience his provision in ways we couldn't imagine, whether it's material needs, emotional support, or spiritual strength. Faith opens the door for him to meet our needs perfectly. The feeding of the 5,000 happened because the people trusted Jesus with what little they had. Trusting God reveals his ability to provide abundantly, even in scarcity. Perfectionism often stems from fear of failure or rejection, but trusting God frees us from these pressures. We learn that we don't have to be perfect to be loved and used by him, allowing us to embrace our imperfections with grace. Peter trusted Jesus despite his denial, showing that God's love doesn't depend on our perfection. Trusting God releases us from the need to be flawless. Instead of hiding our weaknesses, trusting God teaches us to accept them. Our imperfections become opportunities for his strength to shine, showing that his grace is sufficient in our weakness. Paul embraced his thorn in the flesh, trusting that God's grace was enough. Trusting God helps us embrace our weaknesses, knowing he works through them. As we trust God, we begin to know him more deeply. Our faith opens our eyes to his goodness, faithfulness, and love, revealing the full depth of his character. Moses' relationship with God deepened as he trusted him through various challenges, and he came to understand God's nature more clearly. Trusting God transforms our understanding of who he is. Trusting God helps us let go of the illusion of self-sufficiency and humbly rely on him. We learn that we are not meant to carry the weight of life alone. Our dependence on God brings true strength. The Apostle Paul wrote about how God's strength was made perfect in his weakness, teaching us that our dependence on God is not a burden but a source of power. We often fear what we don't understand, but trusting God allows us to embrace uncertainty with peace. We trust that God holds the future, even when we cannot see what lies ahead. Abraham trusted God's command to leave his homeland, even though he didn't know where he was going. Trusting God gives us the peace to navigate the unknown. When we are confused and unsure, trusting God brings clarity. His word and his spirit guide us, providing the wisdom and understanding we need to make decisions. The disciples trusted Jesus, even when they didn't understand everything he was doing. Trusting God clears the fog of confusion and reveals his plan. The fear of rejection often holds us back, but when we trust God, we recognize that his approval is enough. We no longer live in fear of human judgment, but find security in his love. Jesus trusted the Father even when rejected by people. Trusting God empowers us to face rejection with confidence and find our worth in his love. When we trust God, he can heal and restore broken relationships. Faith gives us the courage to forgive, the humility to ask for forgiveness, and the patience to allow God to mend what is fractured. Joseph's trust in God allowed him to reconcile with his brothers. Trusting God brings restoration and peace, even in relationships that seem beyond repair. Spiritual growth takes time and effort, but trusting God helps us persevere in the process. We know that He is shaping us even when progress feels slow, and trust fuels our ongoing development in Christ. The journey of the Israelites through the wilderness was long, but trusting God brought them to the promised land. Trust builds endurance in our spiritual walk, even through difficult seasons. Trusting God means surrendering to His will, even when it's difficult or doesn't make sense. Faith teaches us that God's plan, though challenging, is ultimately for our good and His glory. Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, trusting God's will even when it involves suffering. Trusting God enables us to accept His will, knowing it is for our ultimate good. When we trust God, we gain clarity about our purpose in life. Faith leads us to understand that our lives have eternal significance, and we are called to serve God and others with intentionality and meaning. The Apostle Paul trusted God's calling on his life and dedicated himself to spreading the gospel, despite facing great opposition. Trusting God helps us live with a clear sense of purpose. Trusting God strengthens our prayer life, as we believe that our prayers are heard and answered according to His will. Faith enables us to approach God boldly, asking for help, wisdom, and strength in every situation. Elijah prayed for rain after a long drought, trusting God's promise, and the rain came. Trusting God empowers our prayers to align with His will, leading to powerful results. When we trust God's justice and mercy, we are able to forgive others. Faith in His forgiveness empowers us to release grudges and extend grace, knowing that God will deal justly with all. Stephen trusted God as he was being stoned and prayed for his persecutors. Trusting God frees us from the chains of unforgiveness and allows His love to flow through us. Trusting God helps us accept His perfect timing, even when things don't unfold the way we expect. Faith teaches us to wait patiently, knowing that He will make everything beautiful in its time. Sarah had to wait many years for the promised child, Isaac. Trusting God means believing that His timing is always perfect, even when it requires waiting. When we trust God with our finances, we release the grip of materialism and greed. Faith helps us view money as a tool to serve God and others, not as an idol to worship or a source of security. The widow who gave her last 2 coins trusted God to provide for her needs, demonstrating that trust in God brings freedom from the pursuit of wealth. When we trust God, we can be content with what we have, knowing He provides for our needs. Faith helps us focus on God's sufficiency rather than constantly desiring more. Paul learned to be content in every situation, whether in abundance or need. Trusting God allows us to experience contentment regardless of circumstances. Trusting God builds resilience, helping us bounce back from adversity. Even when life knocks us down, faith gives us the strength to rise again, knowing that God is with us. Job lost everything, but his trust in God gave him the resilience to endure and eventually restore what he had lost. Trusting God strengthens us to persevere through challenges. Faith in God opens our hearts to the needs of others. Trusting God fills us with His compassion and motivates us to serve and care for those around us, reflecting His love to the world. The Good Samaritan trusted God to do what was right and help the wounded man, demonstrating that faith leads to practical acts of love and kindness. When we trust God, we understand who we truly are in Him. Faith helps us see that our identity is not defined by our circumstances, achievements, or others' opinions, but by God's love and purpose for our lives. Jesus' trust in His Father defined His identity, even in the face of opposition. Trusting God helps us understand and live out our true identity in Christ. Trusting God allows us to rest in the knowledge that He is in control. No matter what happens in our lives, we can trust that God's sovereign will is always at work for our good and His glory. Jesus trusted His Father's plan even as He faced the cross, knowing it was part of a greater purpose. Trusting God's sovereignty gives us peace, knowing He is always in control. When we trust God, He gives us supernatural strength to face life's challenges. Trust allows us to draw from His power, which strengthens us when we are weary. Isaiah 40:31 tells us that those who trust in the Lord will renew their strength and soar like eagles. Trusting God recharges our energy and enables us to press on. Rather than focusing solely on the destination, trusting God allows us to embrace the process. Faith teaches us that growth happens along the way, and each step is part of God's plan for us. The Israelites trusted God during their 40-year journey in the desert. Trusting God enables us to appreciate the journey, knowing each step is shaping us for the future. When we trust God, we stop comparing ourselves to others. We understand that He has uniquely crafted us for a specific purpose, and we can fully embrace our individuality. David didn't compare himself to King Saul when facing Goliath. His trust in God allowed him to be confident in his own calling and abilities. Trusting God removes the weight of comparison. Trusting God requires us to surrender control of our lives. It means letting go of our need to manage every detail and allowing God to take the lead, trusting that His plans are always better. Jesus modeled surrender in the Garden of Gethsemane, submitting to God's will despite His own desires. Trusting God means releasing our need for control and yielding to His perfect will. Faith is the foundation of spiritual growth. Trusting God enables us to step into deeper intimacy with Him, allowing our spiritual lives to flourish as we rely on His guidance. The Apostle Peter grew in his trust and relationship with God as he walked with Jesus. Trusting God is the gateway to becoming more spiritually mature and growing closer to Him. When we trust God, we become more attuned to His voice. Trust opens our hearts and minds to hear from God, whether through scripture, prayer, or His Spirit, guiding us in our decisions. Samuel's trust in God enabled him to hear God's voice clearly as a young boy, showing that trust allows us to discern His direction in our lives. Trusting God gives us hope when we experience pain or suffering. Even in difficult times, we know that God is with us, working everything for our good, and that He has a purpose in our trials. Paul and Silas sang praises in prison because they trusted God's plan for them. Trusting God transforms suffering into an opportunity for hope and growth. Trusting God shifts our focus from the temporary to the eternal. We begin to live with an eternal perspective, understanding that our lives on earth are part of a much larger, eternal plan. Jesus focused on eternal purposes, not earthly fame or wealth. Trusting God helps us align our priorities with His, living in a way that reflects our eternal hope. Faith in God gives us the courage to step out in boldness, even when the future seems uncertain. Trusting Him allows us to take risks for the sake of His kingdom, knowing He will lead us. Esther trusted God and made the bold decision to approach the king, risking her life to save her people. Trusting God empowers us to make bold, faith-driven decisions. Ultimately, trusting God yields eternal rewards. Faithfulness in trusting God in this life leads to blessings in eternity, where our trust is fully realized in His presence. Jesus promised eternal rewards to those who remain faithful to Him. Trusting God leads us to treasures in heaven, where our faith is fully realized.